So for many, many years I've been here, and I'm afraid I'm going to do it again, depressing everybody about the state of the world economy. And that will happen at 1 o'clock. For various reasons, we moved it around. But for many years, people have tried to get me to do something more suitable to this conference, summit. And they finally found the one area of luxury that really interests me, which is wine. But of course, wine, unlike everything else, this is where I probably won't get out of the room, that you're talking about, is not a luxury, it's an absolute necessity. So it's still not quite perfect, but nonetheless, I was very, very happy to take on this panel. You've already been told that you're going to have some questions to answer, and if you're going to ask questions of the speakers in the course of our discussions, you're also going to have to send them through Slido, so your technological expertise and intelligence is going to be tested, and please get on to this so we can answer the questions. So before I go to the questions, let me very, very briefly introduce our panelists. So immediately to my left is Jancis Robinson, Master of Wine, who's been the wine correspondent of the Financial Times almost as long as I've been the economics commentator, which I probably shouldn't have mentioned, and is, of course, the best writer in the world on wine, in my view, and just about the greatest expert. So on her left is Simon Staples, who's fine wine director of Berry Brothers and Rudd, which is a firm I know quite well. And he just told me, I asked him, is this the oldest wine merchant in England? And Simon was a little bit upset, said, no, it's the oldest wine merchant in the world. A family business in the 10th generation. I think this is just wonderful. That's real sort of the sort of thing you should all be aspiring to. And finally, on his left is Antonio Menéndez, Managing Director, Sales and Marketing for Vega, Sicilia. Is that how you pronounce it here?
Yes.
Because to me it's Sicilia. And which is, I think, almost universally considered Spain's greatest wine. So we have a wonderful panel. And before we get into our discussion, let's have the questions. The first questions, I'm trying to find out the relationship of this audience to this vital subject. So first of all, how many glasses of wine do you normally drink every week? None, if there are some terrible teetotalers here. Between 5 and 10, more than 10, or more than 20? Yeah. Okay. You're probably all lying, by the way. I'm told that when you ask this question, people always halve their true consumption. So we're getting there. I think we should probably stop there. So come back. I need the answers. Can't you come back? Yeah. Okay, so between 5 and 10, 43%. Can we freeze it? Is it possible to freeze it, or can't it be done? Anyway, so between 5 and 10, 41%. None, 2%, that's good. Between 5 and 10, 39%. More than 10, 14%. Only 4% of you are prepared to admit that you drink 20 glasses of wine. 3% now, more than 20. I admire those people. Yep. I suspect that's... Anyway, it's obvious that pretty well everywhere in this room is a wine consumer, and some of you drink in proper amounts. The second question is, what countries' wines do you mostly drink? So France, Italy, Spain, other European, other parts of the world, or a mixture of all of the above? That's quite interesting. Okay, that is interesting. So it is dominated by the 3 European superpowers of wine, which I would roughly expect. But I am quite interested that France, Italy, and Spain are pretty close together. And this audience at least doesn't seem to concentrate very much on non-European parts, non-European wines. It would have been quite interesting to do this panel in the United States with the same questions. France is just ahead of Italy and Spain, which between them take about 3/4 of the, not necessarily the market, but of the active dominant attention of this audience. So clearly this is the right panel to have in Europe, and particularly in this country. Finally, is your attitude to wine that of a consumer looking for enjoyment, an investor looking to make a profit? Your dominant attitude, nobody wants to be an investor at all. A bit of both. Right. Simon, you've got a little work ahead of you.
Yes, well, a lot to play with here.
Terrible mistake. It's a wonderful investment. Okay, so this is an audience overwhelmingly of consumers and who don't regard wine as a liquid asset in this famous statement which you get in the English wine trade. So that was very, very interesting. I learned a lot there. Some of it actually surprised me. I'd expected more of you to invest in wine. So let's start then our discussion with wine as an industry. What sort of industry is the wine industry? Is it large? Is it small? How does it compare with other parts of the luxury business? So, Jancis, tell us about wine.
Okay.
As a business.
Well, the total volume of wine made is about 3 billion, the equivalent of about 3 billion cases of 12 bottles a year. But it's worth pointing out that we're still, the world is still making slightly more wine than it consumes, even though the EU has done its best to encourage people to pull out the inferior vineyards and to distill surplus wine into alcohol. As for money, the average value at retail of wine is, I've got the 2016 figures, so they're probably way out of date, about $288 billion US. Put in the shade rather by beer, which is $600 billion. But then huge tracts of the world don't drink wine at all, and beer is the alcoholic drink that's the most common. And spirits is 476 billion was in 2016. But all these figures, of course, are retail and include taxes, and spirits are wildly much more heavily taxed than either wine or beer, although various bits of the world, one would say, wine is heavily taxed. The largest markets are the US, but heavily being challenged by China. And in fact, perhaps by now, China may even have overtaken. They're both sort of over $40 billion. Then France, but that is declining. And the good old UK is the fourth biggest market for wine at 23 billion. Then Japan, Italy, Germany, and Canada. And I think you're interested in profitability. And my guess, but I don't have figures for this, and I don't know what you feel, is that probably North America, US, and Canada are the most profitable places to sell wine, because Americans do seem to quite like to spend money, whereas the Brits rather hate it, certainly, and in many cases. And it's very, very competitive, the UK market and Germany. And so it's much more difficult to make a profit there.
I suppose just very interesting numbers. So not an enormous industry, in fact.
Oh, now comparing it with others.
Yes.
There's some dispute as to the value of the fashion market. But it's obviously
Fashion clothing.
Fashion clothing. It's much, 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 much bigger than any of those drinks. Trillions. Yeah.
I presume that if you added up the European countries together, from the figures you give, they probably add up to at least half the world's wine market.
Oh, yes. Yes,
So
yes,
Europe
but-
is, in fact, the centre of the industry, not only in production, but also in consumption.
Yes, but they're declining. Europeans, particularly the three big producers, used to, and Portugal and places like that, used to drink huge quantities of wine. And thanks partly to health concerns, and it's declining rapidly, has been declining. And Spain has a big problem with very low consumption of wine among young people, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep. So, Simon, tell us a little bit about the trade in wine, how you perceive it, and where the sort of fine wine end that you are obviously mainly dealing with fits into the overall picture, because this is wine is a category which goes from the $5 bottle to the $40,000 bottle. There are maybe I'm probably underestimating the 40,000.
Never heard of a $5 bottle.
Yeah, well, yes, you can find it somewhere.
It's very interesting that if you actually had 500 million pounds or euros or whatever, you could clean up the whole fine wine market in one day. That's how small it actually is. It's very, very small. But that obviously every year another vintage is produced, etc., etc. But it's also what is being consumed around the world every day. Are 50 cases of Lafite being drunk every day? Are 200 cases of Vega? Probably. Somewhere around the world. So every time anyone invests in it, the product is going down and down all the time, and you can't buy more of it. And actually, to make better wine, you have to make less wine. So it's more concentrated and better. So.
Where do you see the sort of specialist retailer stroke trader like Berries fitting in, say, in the English market against the supermarkets and all the rest? Are you in completely different parts of the market, or is there an overlap between you?
I think over the last few years we've tried to overlap it a bit too much. I think actually people. So I've been at my company for 23 years, and for the first 6 months I thought, this is so old-fashioned. I can exploit this, being completely honest. And then I realised that when someone brings their daughter or son into a wine merchant who says, this is my son, can you look after him? And then suddenly you get it and you go, this is a relationship for years and years. It's not for the quick earn, really. And that I'm genuinely very, very proud of doing something like that. But people are not going to buy all their wine from me. They're still going to go to Sainsbury's or Waitrose or wherever it is every day, and they're going to have their wine. But they'll actually choose their best. They'll ask me for that kind of input, and they'll obviously read Jancis' column as well. Yeah.
Obviously, one of the features of the English wine trade, at least my perception as an amateur, is that because the English still basically don't make any wine. Now, there are exceptions. Somebody will throw something at me. But we historically, English and I think the Americans to a considerable degree, simply because it's such a vast market, have bought and consumed wine from all over the world. And they're all available. So a firm like yours has a list which includes wine pretty well from everywhere. Well, my impression is in the major producing countries, particularly in Europe, people still overwhelmingly buy the wine of their own country. And so the question I have is a firm like Berries sort of uniquely Anglo-American, or perhaps just uniquely English, and you wouldn't find equivalents to your firm in operating in Italy or France or Germany or Spain?
I'm not really aware of them.
I think North Germany, around Hamburg and things, had a tradition.
Yeah.
Trade. They're trading.
Yeah.
They were a trading city too.
Yeah.
Yes, that would be true. But then, so that means that the other markets are more national. Is that correct?
Yeah, definitely.
Or at least the major producers.
Definitely. I mean, if you go to France and you try to find a bottle of Italian wine, you have to look very, very hard
And
to get
ditto Italian wine, French wine in Italy is pretty hard, actually, though it is available. If I may turn to you, Mr. Menéndez, tell us a little bit about Vega, Sicilia. What's your market? Do you sell mostly in Spain? Do you sell worldwide? Who do you see as your competitors?
Well, Vega Sicilia is currently composed of 5 wineries. 4 of them are located in Spain. They are red wine wineries. And 1 is located in Hungary. It's mainly about wine, almost sweet, but we also produce 1 dry for mint wine in Hungary. We are currently producing around 1.2 million bottles overall in total. The main winery that we have, the most important one is Vega Sicilia, that was founded 155 years ago in 1864. But we also have a Lyon in the same region, Ribera del Duero. We have a winery in Rioja called Macan that is actually a joint venture with the Rothschild family. Okay. It's the only winery in the group that does not belong 100% to Vega Sicilia. And we also have 1 winery in Toro region, that is Pintia. The name of the winery in Tokai is Oremus. Overall, the 1.2 million bottles that we produce, we sell approx 70% in the export market and 30% in Spain. The main market for us outside Spain is Mexico, where we sell around 10% of our bottles. Then we have Switzerland, United States, Germany and UK. That would be the top 5. If we put together China mainland and Hong Kong, that would be probably our number 4 market right now.
That's, I had no idea that your biggest export market would be Mexico.
Yes.
I wouldn't have thought, that shows my ignorance, that Mexico is a big wine market.
No, I mean, it makes sense.
Very educational.
No, it makes sense because Mexico has a very strong Spanish heritage.
Of course.
And also our wines are very expensive when you go abroad, outside of Spain. So we basically target let's say the high end, the peak of the social pyramid. And that peak in Mexico is very strong, is very wealthy. So we have a lot of consumers who are very loyal to us. And when they come to Spain, they also buy our wines very often here in the restaurants.
Is yours still a family business?
Yes, it is, yeah.
That's what I thought.
Yeah.
And there's still a lot of family businesses in this business. So let me turn now to buying wine for pleasure, for consumption. So Jancis, what wines, this is obviously an audience that predominantly drinks the wines they're familiar with, the local wines, dominated by European producers. What wines do you think they might not have thought of trying, they should be trying, for pleasure?
I think they should be aware of the massive effects of climate change on the shape of the world wine map, and that there are now parts of the world that you would never, ever have thought would even manage to ripen a grape that can make actually jolly good wines. Last week, I tasted a whole load of really quite impressive Canadian wines, when certainly Canadian wines were not anything to shout about a couple of decades ago. Germany is now ripening its grapes, so it can now make Pinot Noirs to rival Burgundy, and Burgundy prices have shot up, so I think it's worth looking at Germany again. I used to be very snooty about English wine, but actually now I'm very proud of the quality of English sparkling wine, which is giving Champagne quite a run for its money, and we've now got 2 champagne houses who've invested directly in English sparkling wine. And finally, perhaps, there has been a climate change effect on the traditional wine regions, the most famous ones of Bordeaux and Burgundy. Nowadays, you have appellation such as Saint-Aubin and Saint-Romain, where grapes struggled to ripen many years. Now they're making wines that can make some Meursaults and Pouilly-Montrachets look a bit sort of fat. So the map is changing. And in Bordeaux, which is Simon's speciality, and I hesitate to even mention it, but you sell all the posh stuff, but because of climate change, it's much easier now to ripen grapes in the lesser areas. So you've got lots of Petit Chateau, the less well-known names, that can turn out some jolly good wine most years now, at a fraction of the price of the stuff that you sell.
I was just we'll come to that.
Cheaper wines.
We'll come to that in a second. I was just reminding that there's a very famous passage in The Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith. I probably shouldn't have mentioned the authors, not necessary. in which he says, in giving a justification for comparative advantage in trade, that of course you could grow grapes in Scotland and you could make pretty bad wine with them, but under under glass, but it really wouldn't be very sensible to do so, because you can import it so much more cheaply. So the Scots should do something else. So can we look perhaps with climate change to a time when Adam Smith will be proved wrong, and actually you could grow perfectly good grapes in Scotland without glass, and Scotland will be a great wine producer.
It's possible. There is somebody struggling away in Yorkshire, as far north as Yorkshire now.
So it's getting there.
Yeah.
It's getting up north. Antonio Menéndez, have you any views on what sort of wines people should be looking for drinking for pleasure? How does, as opposed to investment?
Well, I would obviously recommend any of Vega Sicilia wines.
Of course. Beyond that.
No, but especially we are producing a dry wine in Hungary that is, to me, is probably the most important addition or the main highlight of the recent history of Vega Sicilia, because it's the first dry wine ever made in the history with a Furmin grape, that is the main variety that they have in Hungary. And this is important because it's a region that has been making wine for almost 4 centuries. And I mean, it's good to say also that it's probably one of the cheapest wine that we have in our portfolio. So although it's not a cheap wine, it's much more affordable than our standard wines.
How much does your most expensive bottle of wine cost?
Well, actually, it's a wine from Oremus. It's called Esencia. It's a sweet wine, but it's very exclusive. We only produce between 200 and 300 bottles every year. And the cost, retail cost here in Spain could be around 500-600 euros, approx. Yeah. In the red wines, the most expensive wine is Único Reserva Especial. That is a blend of 3 vintages of Único. That is our, well, probably our flagship wine. And that is about between 400 and 500 euros retail store.
Simon,
it's cheaper in the UK.
Okay, okay. Tell us about wine for consumption, but also now talk a little bit, move on to wine for investment. What wines make good investments beyond, are the wines that you would want to buy to consume similar to essentially the same sorts of wines or completely different sorts of wines? How do you approach this?
Complex question.
Yes.
For me, as I mentioned to you earlier, that I have no other investments in anything else apart from wine. And it's mainly because I love wine more than anything else, but I don't know. The traditional areas of Bordeaux and Burgundy, and as Jancis said about Burgundy, prices have gone absolutely ridiculous over the last 3 or 4 years, and they're not making very much. And it's every year it's being affected by climate change and what have you. So there's nothing to buy, and the prices just go up and up and up. But then it stops because people just go, I'm not paying that anymore. But
it's driven by the Chinese market to a very significant extent.
The wine market in China is very difficult to sort of like pin down, because obviously getting wine into Hong Kong, there is no duty or tax or VAT or anything there. But then getting it into mainland China is very complicated, and it's there's 50% import tax. You don't really know where it goes. Everything goes into Hong Kong and then it disappears. And you don't quite know what happens after that. And there are definitely envelopes being exchanged to get these wines in. One of my best customers has his secretary come to Hong Kong twice a week from Shenzhen to actually bring 2 bottles in at a time, which is just, I mean, he can afford to pay
because
for
that's
it.
the duty-free allowance.
Yes, but I'm not paying the duty or the VAT. So that's, yeah, so it is difficult, isn't it, about knowing what's really consumed in China. And I think also because of what's happened in the market in the last few years, where prices in 2009, 2010, the prices collapsed, basically.
Yes.
40 or 50% came off the prices. The Chinese market suddenly went, I'm not interested in doing this anymore. and they've walked away. And also the whole the area where people are given wine as thank you presents and things like that has changed completely.
Of course.
So it's different. It's definitely changed, and I don't think it's as lucrative as it once was, and I don't see it being like that again, really. However, it's very stable. It's very low risk, really, I think. But but what you're looking at, you need to do 5 to 10 years of thinking ahead, and you're probably looking at 5 to 10% a year, where it used to be 20 to 30% a year.
So what will be, given the immensely high prices of Bordeaux, some of the very top Bordeaux and Burgundy, what would be your favoured possible investment wines which people aren't thinking about?
Well, it's going to be really annoying to say that I actually agree with Jancis, which is it's how many years? Yeah, anyway, they'll tell you, it's very depressing. Yeah. But I do agree with there are far more enjoyable wines being produced, particularly in Bordeaux now. For €10 or something like that, you can get something that's really, really great to drink.
Yeah.
That's not going to go up in price. It's actually going to go down in price over the years.
To invest, you have to really lay out for the top wines.
And you have to also think about the storage costs. It costs basically
the same, whatever the quality of the wine. So it's going to be much smaller per bottle if you go for the £5,000 bottle.
Yeah. So I don't think investable wine. I don't think you should be looking at less than €600-700 a case of 12. Otherwise, if you have to wait 10 years for it, it costs £1 or €1 a bottle a year to store. Yes, there are tax advantages, as we mentioned, but that's where I'd look. But also, the classic areas are the things that people still want to have more than anything else. There is that the gentleman that was talking earlier. It's just that desirability. It doesn't matter whether it's €100 or €500. People want the best, or what they perceive as the best.
So does that mean that the crucial thing in buying wine as an investment is the name, actually? So if you're going to buy wine for an investment, it's a good idea that it's Lafite or Petrus, because that's the label, and that's what, even though it's an immense outlay, you have to be in that part of the market. And even a great second growth or third growth just isn't going to hack it from an investment point of view.
No, I would have said that 5 years ago, definitely. Right. Now, no. I
you wouldn't say that anymore.
The properties have realised that their wines go up in price, and then therefore they're taking all the profit out of it for everybody else. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's their wine, they own it. That's fine.
So they're taking out the profit.
Yeah.
So that makes the return on investment much lower.
Yeah. So therefore you have to go slightly further downstream to get the return. So if you want to look at things like Chateau Gros or Contamel and things like that, they always go up in price because people still go, this is affordable.
Right.
But a bottle of Lafite at €500, to most people, it's just unaffordable, really.
So what about your wines as an investment? Are they a good investment?
Well, I think they are. It's not my opinion. Actually, when you go to the auction houses, you see Vega Sicilia wines that are always placed in the top part of the auctions, and there are people who pay a lot of money especially for old vintages. To me, one of the most important things is the consistency and the ability to age well when buying a wine. So obviously, name is very important, and this is something that has to be consolidated through the years. So it's not easy to find,
of course,
let's say, a young winery with a young wine and a good name. And what is more important is to get to know wines with the ability to age well. So wines that can be kept in a cellar for, let's say, 20, 30, 40 years, and with being sure that those wines are going to be great in the future. And that is something that, for example, is one of the main characteristics of Vega Sicilia, that ability to age well. So nowadays, the Unicos from the 60s, from the 70s, even from the 50s, they are amazing. So they are not good, they are even better than they were before. I had the chance to try an Unico from 1915, 4 years ago, and I mean, and it was great. It was an old wine, but it was not only drinkable, it was enjoyable. And that is something very, very difficult to find. To me also, one more thing on top of this is the fact that you have to be able to get access to those wines. So it's great to have DRC, to have Petrus, but it's not easy to find those wines. And obviously, it's not easy to find those wines at a good price. So as in everything in life, you have to buy cheap and sell expensive. So to get access to those wines, to me, for a consumer, is the most challenging thing to invest in wine.
So this is a 100-year investment, potentially. So anything you have to add, and then I'll just get a few questions that I've got from Slido.
Yes, very important, of course, that wines like this have to be in good condition. They have to have been stored well.
That is actually one of the questions. How important is not only that they have been stored well, but given that you can't find out until you open them, the proof that they've been stored well, in the cellars of a first-rate merchant. That is presumably very important.
Essential. And I actually have 2 specific investment tips, very unlike me.
The first, I guess.
Heavens, I've never heard this.
I'm looking forward to this column, Jancis.
No, it's exclusive to this group.
Okay.
Firstly, I'd like to point out that investing in wine is so much cheaper than buying yourself a yacht or some great modern artwork or something like that. But the 2 specifics are, this very morning, I got a report in from our Italian specialist on my website, jancisrobinson.com, and he's been reviewing vintages in Italy, the length and breadth of it, for years and years and years. And he is absolutely thrilled about 2016 Barbaresco, up in Piemonte in the north of Italy. I would say that those Barolo and Barbaresco are still good investments, because although they've gone up in price, they haven't gone ridiculously up in price.
They're still cheap.
And Barolo is very like Burgundy in that it's sort of little family plots and stuff. And it's always overshadowed its neighbour, Barbaresco. But Walter Speller thinks that 16 is the breakout vintage for Barbaresco. And the other tip is whiskey. It's shown fantastic returns, hasn't it, recently?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Of course.
You're writing
I should have my own investment site here. Yeah.
Whiskey, of course, is not part of our discussion. So that will be next year we'll have a panel on whiskey, but it will have to be chaired by somebody who drinks it, and that won't be me.
It won't be me.
But the Italian, the Piemonte wines are among my absolute world-leading favourites. So
I don't get it at all.
Yeah, well,
I really don't.
Well, that proves another thing. Wine is a matter of taste.
Totally.
Totally. So we have some really fantastic questions. How do you compare wine as an investment versus art? Well, you made a sort of preliminary say. I suspect the capital you have to outlay, unless you're a genius and very lucky in finding the next Picasso at the age of 18, in art might be sort of 2 or 3 orders of magnitude more, even than the sort of wine we're talking about. So wine is an investment for non-billionaires.
Exactly.
That may be one answer. For the 2 or 3 of you in the audience who's not a billionaire, consider wine. We've already talked about storage, which actually... one of the other questions. How do you see the growing trend of organic food in relationship with winemaking? There's a lot of discussion of organic winemaking. Would you like to talk about that, and perhaps you afterward? Would you like to talk about organic winemaking and whether that's a thing, Jancis?
It's certainly true that throughout the world of wine and agriculture generally, chemical inputs have been dramatically reduced, which is a jolly good thing. I'm very suspicious of wines that are sold solely on the basis of being organic. They're not usually terribly good. But an increasing proportion of the world's wine is made according to organic principles, some of it even to biodynamic, which is taking it to an extreme, too long to explain. But generally, wine production is much healthier today than it was decades ago.
Can I say, no one has ever asked me for what's the best organic wine you sell, ever.
Okay, that will.
But that doesn't mean.
Actually, this is one of the questions that I think is a very interesting one. Is how do you get young people into buying wine, make them feel, and drinking it, making them feel that it's a good thing, part of civilized life. What do you think about the transmission of wine culture, particularly in those countries where drinking wine is not just simply part of the national, the core national? It's inconceivable not to drink wine in Italy or, I suspect, Spain or France. But do you find the young people are just as enthusiastic as their parents and grandparents? There's no problem in developing a new generation of wine consumers?
I don't think so, but I mean, the whole thing about it is it's sharing wine with food and stuff like that. Everything that we all do this for, that's what it's all about. And you have to translate that down through the generations. And yes, there's definitely in the UK, alcohol consumption is way down than it used to.
Yes, exactly. That's the point.
But wine.
It seems to be it's sort of healthier, isn't it? Isn't the answer is give up spirits and just consume wine? And beer, of course.
Gin is huge, becoming huge.
That's
now.
terrible.
Craft beer.
And I think
Spain gin.
it's a lot about education and educating people. If you see the countries with a stronger wine market, and here we can think of Switzerland or France, with more than 40 liters per person and year. If you go out in the night, you will see, especially in Switzerland, you will see young people drinking a glass of wine instead of having a beer or a whiskey or a gin or whatever. And that is because they have seen that at home and they have the wine in their culture. And definitely Spain was pretty much that way several years ago. And now we are losing that ability to engage the young people. So we need to educate them.
So there is a problem, even in Spain.
Well, I wouldn't say a problem, but there is a negative trend. So we are losing some young consumers. And the other key point to me is the quality of the wine. So we need to make good wines, to do the things in the right way. And obviously, when you offer a product that is high quality, it's easier to the people to get engaged to it.
Simon, you mentioned, I think, a sort of average figure for return on a well-managed wine portfolio.
Yep.
What in your experience after costs, maybe that storage costs, a reasonable return might have been over the last 10 years, or some
somewhere like 10% per year.
nominal?
Yeah.
I mean, or certainly compare well with an interest rate of 0.
Yeah, totally. And I do it because I can see the market, and if I make a mistake,
you're right.
Exactly, it's my mistake. But you have to get it. I don't think there's any point in investing in wine if you have no interest in wine. I think that's changed than 10 years ago, whatever.
There used to be wine funds, didn't
Yeah,
there?
totally.
For people who had no intention of ever
consuming a bottle.
Yeah.
As I mentioned to you, so my second and third largest customer, I have about 50 customers around the world. They will not drink a bottle of wine more than £10, but they invest in it because there is no tax on it, and they invest in wine and racehorses. That's it. And they have probably £50 million worth of wine. But they won't drink more than £10 a bottle. Ever.
Well, that seems to prove you can be a successful investor in wine without having any interest in the product itself.
Yeah, but it's much more enjoyable for me to manage
buying
someone
Picasso, despite the fact that you actually hate his works of art. It
Exactly.
seems slightly peculiar.
Exactly.
But people are.
Or buying Barolo.
We won't. I think I've probably got to stop. And I'm going to ask each of you in sort of 30 seconds what you think, from the point of view of investment in wine, the most important single thing this audience needs to know.
You first.
There is a lot of fake wine, a huge amount of fake wine. And as you were saying about the storage conditions about wine, you have to make sure that is sound before you do anything.
So go to a reputable dealer in the first place.
Let me think of one. Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
No,
There are two or three in the world.
No, there are probably 4. No, but there's probably, there's 10, 20 merchants around the world that are really good and will look after you. But you have to be really careful. And I would be really worried about buying wines that are 10, 15 years old and you don't know where they've come from. It's like you wouldn't buy a second-hand Porsche from some guy you meet in a bar in Madrid tonight, I hope. No, but you've got to make sure that's
Go on
fine.
an auction run by a reputable house.
Yeah, that's fine. But I mean,
Any
otherwise.
advice you would give, apart from buying Vega Sicilia?
Well, difficult, but I would say probably there are 2 ways to approach the wine investment. One is through consolidated brands, and second, if you want to bet on a new brand, I would look for 2 things: exclusivity, so this is low productions, and high quality. And high quality is basically good terroir. At the end, the wine is made with grapes, and the grapes is the most important thing when talking about the quality of a wine. So if you need to bet on something new, I would look for that.
Okay, makes a lot of sense. Jancis, last
And
word.
I would just say, always be very, very wary of anybody who approaches you suggesting that you invest in wine. There are certainly in Britain, there are lots of really suspect outfits, aren't there? No, I'm not looking at you. No. But I mean, the people who've actually gone to jail because
lots.
they cold call, they get names of widows and chat them up, and they even have websites with respectable addresses and say, we have a total of 50 years in the wine trade. Well, it's probably, a van driver and one other chap. So just only deal with people, blue chip merchants.
So I think we've had a wonderful panel, fair amount of promotion, which is inevitable.
Oh, can I just say that Pintier is my wife's favourite wine?
Naturally, inevitably. I think the lessons you can take is that if you're careful and sensible, investment is a perfectly viable thing to do. But there's been a bit of a roller coaster in this market in prices, and so I've always taken the view in myself, not in the 50 million category, that if I've taken the view that if the investment doesn't work out, at least I can drown my sorrows by drinking it all. That seems a sensible attitude. And the other thing that I took from here, which is really, really interesting, is climate change is changing the world of wine. So be adventurous. Because there are some we didn't talk about New World wines, which we would have done elsewhere, but be adventurous. There are lots of other wines than the ones that you're all familiar with. So anyway, I've enjoyed this enormously. I've learned a lot, and thank you very much for the panelists.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.